Hi, Ted. Nice to meet
Greetings,
you.
Sid.
Good to meet you. What a pleasure.
Pleasure's ours. Thank you for your time. So just going back to discussing the Stephen's book, we'd love to hear your feedback on that.
As I mentioned to you, I think it is truly the pathway for this global community, finding our oneness, recovering the essence of what has been lost in the religions and especially Christianity, and yet doing so mindful of that razor's edge of not going into some new age superficiality.
Yes, yes, yes.
And I will say this to you, I find it wonderfully paradoxical that you, such disciplined martial artists,
Mm,
who understand viscerally the
mm.
necessity of effort,
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
speak as though no effort is required. Now, I honor the fact that you discovered, like Martin Luther, who for 20 years was an Augustinian monk on those stone floors, doing
Yeah,
everything possible, and
yes,
finally had the illumination,
yes,
justification through grace by faith. Okay.
yes,
So you too, having struggled so hard and gone through
yes.
what you've been through, are
Mm.
given that divine consolation
Mm,
that you can just receive. And I'm reminded of Karlfried Graf Durkheim,
mm.
a name you should know,
Yes.
who says, "Open the door and let yourself be found."
Mm,
And yet, at the same time, we must use that free will, that desire to love God back, to cleanse the inside of the cup, to watch, do not sleep, that vigilance of Christ. And that is attention, that is focus, that is discipline, that is spiritual warfare with ego to make
definitely.
the choice. So the danger is people see what you're saying from your journey, which is
Mm.
beautifully, honestly, humbly shared. And I appreciate that. And the danger of defaulting to, okay, I don't have to do anything.
I see. I
I
see.
can remain vain, narcissistic, mean spirited, petty, all of that.
Mm.
How many spiritual teachers in our day are egocentric narcissists?
It's
They're
true.
by the truckload.
True. True. But this point I was trying to make, that you are enough as you are, this has to be very carefully understood in its right context. Okay. When we look at the teaching of Jesus Christ, when he was talking about the lost coin, the lost sheep, the lost son, there's Luke chapter 15, I think. The lost coin has an image inscribed on it. The image, he was referring to, we have the image and likeness of God within us, right? A lost son is a wonderful description of what we become when we don't know this central image and likeness that we have inherited freely by grace. It is always, it has always been there, this internal treasure that is within us, right? Untarnished, beautiful, pristine, light, right? Now, what I was trying to explain in the book was this. I was trying to work for that which was already there. I was laboring, exhausting myself day in, day out, when when I came to the point that the light was already there. I had taken on a mechanism. I realized I'd taken on a mechanism from the material world. You must concentrate harder. You must pay more attention. You must work harder. You must climb harder. Those mechanisms are indoctrinated in us when we're kids. Pay attention. Attention is there already. Push. Why do I need to push when God has created me to be who I am? Strive. I know Paul uses the word strive. Strive to come into his presence, but his indwelling presence is already within us.
You're
So,
speaking of the mystery of effortless effort.
yes, yes, I'm speaking of that, yes.
Yes. Uh, and so let me share with you in dialogue ancient Christianity. Okay. And as I bring it up, I'm mindful of the fact that this is a foreign thing to most of us. When you think Christian, you think Protestant, Catholic, don't think Orthodox. And that is an entirely different mystical source, origin of Christianity that we have lost for 1,000 years and completely uh, deviated from. I bring them up to say two things. One is when they speak of the image of God as you just have, yes, it is there. And they tweak it to say, and so our job is to develop the likeness. We have the image, we move into the likeness through what they call the path of theosis.
I understand.
Yeah. God realization is a wonderful way to translate that. Humility, overcoming pride and vanity, all of that, which has been, whose the consciousness of our human condition, which was defined as the eight passions, was distorted into the seven deadly sins in the West. So we've been given false information all the way down the line,
I see.
which makes it difficult for someone like yourself trying to find their way to the light or finding the experiences of the light. You have a very negative rejection of religion,
I do, yes.
which I assure you, no one has more expertise on that than myself, having been a pastor for 30 years. I know how demonic it is, how ruinous it is, how the form itself, with few exceptions, makes it impossible for something authentic to happen. So I agree with you. But I find there's a moment in your book when you almost apologize for using scriptures to your readers to make sure they don't confuse it with the language used in Christian circles.
Definitely. Because I find the Christianity that has been preached, taught in I was raised a Catholic, she was raised a Catholic. I've had I've looked at the Protestant teaching. I've looked at Martin Luther and the Baptist, the Methodist, the Anglican doctrines, the Church of England. I've studied their theology, their doctrines, and I find it so far away from the love letters of the disciples, the early apostles, the teachings of Jesus. In fact, I find the Buddha's teaching far closer to the to Jesus's original teaching than what we have today and what's been preached for thousands of years in Christianity. That's how I honestly feel. As very similar to the dialogue between Nicodemus and Jesus. And Jesus is teaching in very simple truths, and yet he can't grasp them, being a very famous teacher. And I've had lots of dialogue with lots of Christian lecturers, teachers, theologians. They're just spinning all the time without any real understanding of the presence of Christ. It's heartbreaking. In fact, they're doing damage.
Of course, of course. So you're quite right. Did you happen to notice Evelyn Underhill in the Anglican world? Does that name ring a bell? Evelyn
Yes,
Underhill was a laywoman who wrote a masterpiece called Mysticism, a study in consciousness. I forget the subtitle. And then wrote on other marvelous books, The Mystic Way, Practical Mysticism. As an Anglican woman, she tapped into the legacy of all the lovers of God through the different traditions, which is
beautiful.
where we find the unity, the experiential, the connection. But I would urge you, without being an apologist, that is not what I am. I am going with you into the new day
Mhm.
of experience without structure, yes, without mediator, as long as it's truly filled with integrity, right?
I see.
Where ego is truly overcome,
I see.
where God consciousness makes us prostrate in humility before the ultimate and the good and the beautiful.
Amen.
But I would urge you to, while seeing it for what it is, get to know Isaac the Syrian, 7th century, Theophan the Recluse, these masters of spiritual transformation who carried on the tradition, an oral tradition that came down with the scriptures in ancient Christianity, which has completely disappeared. I will say to you up front that even as I encourage people of the West to discover Eastern Orthodoxy, to be initiated into the mystical reality that they live in, that is manifest in their sanctuaries, in their icons, in their candles, in their incense, right? Feeding the senses, this consciousness of something higher. At the same time, I am very aware that it is by definition, a very rigid box, because its whole purpose is to carry an ancient teaching unchanged down through the centuries.
I see. What? So, for me to understand, if you were to clarify the path, the practice of the mystics, how would you clarify that in a daily from a daily perspective? What do they do? What do these um, mystics practice in the Eastern Orthodox tradition? How would you clarify that?
Two different questions there. How do they practice? Let me go to the heart of the matter. The mystic in the East lives in noetic knowing, sees through the nous, the eye of the soul, the center of being, intuitive knowing, emotional knowing. They have a glorious insight that they believe in symbolism that is real time living incarnated symbolism. It's not this is a symbol of God. What we are witnessing is itself manifested symbolism.
I see.
All right, that level of mystical reality, the reality that William Blake touched on, eternity in a grain of sand, that sort of thing. So, what is all this? This is Hezekiah, profound inner tranquility, which of course is parallel to Buddhism and to your journey of meditation. But this profound Hezekiah, this watch of the heart, this consciousness of the battle with thoughts, they have a psychotherapy that is timeless.
Okay.
The logismoi, they call it. And the discernment, the diakrisis, to tell where this is coming from, what to reject, a real inner vigilance,
Right. Okay.
which to them is the heart of Christ's teachings. His special uniqueness is that presence in the moment, vigilance, watch, do not sleep, which is not about the afterlife or the conclusion of history, but of the consciousness of eternity and time, right here, right now.
You see,
It makes perfect sense.
see that makes perfect sense to me. The only thing I would say with that is when we look at the Christian methodology of dealing with not the lower nature but the mind, the overthinking mind, the mind, the vain mind, the vain imagination. Paul talks about casting down vain imaginations, bringing them down into subjection. You see, what I realized, I practiced that for many years, separating the chaff and the wheat. I practiced that for many years. But it was only when I realized in the practice of meditation, real stillness, unbelievable, pure, undefiled, quintessential stillness, that that the mind fell by itself. The mind dropped by the power of the light within. My mind that was racing, my mind that was grasping, that my mind that was fighting, dropped. And this is what I mean without effort. Now, did it take effort for me to sit for 10 hours, for 10 days, for 10 years? Yeah, it did. It did. Took a lot of effort, especially during COVID, where I spent hours just sitting in the stillness of the stillness. But it wasn't my effort. I cannot claim that me, did anything other than sit and trust the divine presence that was within. And maybe I have not articulated it enough in the book, but that's what I've meant. Not by my effort. It's not by my might. I think there's a prophecy in the Old Testament. I think it's the book of Joel who writes, nor by might, nor by my own effort, but by the Spirit, saith the Lord. I, I came to that point, not by might, not by effort, but my Spirit, saith the Lord. That was the point that I came to. So now since 2019, my being is being. My prayer is prayer. My utterances are utterances. There's no longer this struggle. There's no longer this pushing effort.
Yes. So to me, this can be translated into a variety of language, like the fourth way, for instance, Gurdjieff's teachings on consciousness. Not that we need labels, and of course you are quite right. The mind, the scholasticism of the Western Church, the rationalism of the Protestants just completely left the true essence of it, which was that silence, that hezekiah, that communion with the holy, undiluted by rational thought. Mystical detachment, the mystics of the West said. The Meister Eckhart, I don't know if you've run into Meister Eckhart, of course, yes. Okay. So despite the brokenness of the theology of the church, in the West especially, down through history, we get these individuals, Jacob Boehm and others who are lovers of God and transcend the doctrines, the boxes, etc., sometimes at their own peril. And that, to me, is inevitable, that the mystic, the lover of God, he or she who tunes into what you've tuned into, that you share in your book, cannot fit in a box, not even the best box, by definition, and therefore will be rejected by those in the box.
I see.
And yet, Europe is filled with the corpses of empty churches,
yes,
empty cathedrals. People are seeking madly everywhere in the strangest of places. So you, in a sense, are calling them back to the essence of these teachings without the constructs and, as you pointed out, man-made things. And my only issue there would be, even as one who is not in any box now, that on the way, as you with martial arts, with meditation, built that strength of will, even if that strength of will is just to wait expectantly.
I see.
So we humans who have drifted so far from God consciousness need every enabling factor, as Gurdjieff says, and every alarm clock, every trick in the book to be pulled out of our hypnotic, materialistic based state.
I see.
So that the discipline of an orthodox environment where you stand for 4 hours, where you read morning prayers, etc., helps to focus you onto another dimension that most people don't even know exists.
Wow.
I've known others who have found that freedom, yes, that glorious freedom of the children of God.
Yes.
Beyond direction, beyond guides, directly from Spirit. And it takes incredible inner integrity subtlety and refinement to stay tuned to the vibration of spirit, to the inspiration, without any self, without any needful power. And this is where Gurdjieff's fourth way is so realistic, so that developing the power to not be irritated at your beloved over some petty nonsense is a crucial part of an authentic spiritual journey. You know, it's not something small that can be overlooked because it is living in a lower state of oneself. So you asked me about the mystics and their lives. These are people who are flooded with the joy of God, like Rumi's ecstasy. They speak of the gift of tears. They will cry spontaneously with joy and the wonder of things, warming of the heart they speak of. So in this morass of ruin and historical travesty that we see before us, there are these little tiny bits of light that we can still find power in for our journey. The question becomes, where do we go from here? Is it each person's discovery, the luck of the draw? How is it that humanity finds its way to higher consciousness, which is essentially what it is, spiritual awakening?
Yeah, for me, that this is very clear. For me, that it is very clear that once the soul begins to call upon, realize, return back to the essence of truth, even if it's just a small aspect of their soul searching, truth then appears. My book is just a simple pointer to, hey, you can begin now in your home just by sitting quietly and asking, inquiring, praying, asking God to come into your life. That's simple prayer, like the parable of the lost son. That's what my book's about. It's not really pointing to a method. It's not pointing to a tradition. You may pick up from that book that Steve's completely against religion or religious institutions. I know that there are good people in all institutions, as there are corrupt people in institutions. But in my experience of Christianity here in the West, it is so far away from the teaching of Christ that I believe, this is how far I believe it's gone, that I believe if a soul at home simply sits in stillness, he will come closer to the presence of God than in these institutions. This is how I honestly feel inside.
I feel the same way. I would adjust what you said, stillness at home or in their garden.
Or in the garden.
Garden's always better too.
It's true.
Nature, yeah. Yeah.
What intrigues me as I deal with seekers around the world,
Can
as
you
you
imagine?
know, is what is it that comes forward now in this evolution? We have, and you have in your book, brought together the unity of truth found in different religions, which in itself is a major accomplishment, right? Now we're on the edge of where in paganism and appreciation of the aliveness of nature does Christian wisdom meet?
Right.
How does it all integrate so that our elemental need for the reenchantment of the world meet with the highest insights of the mystics of the past and not become pablum and eclectic and
Yes.
so forth? I have to admit to you that I do not believe in the mass awakening of humanity,
Same.
which is a popular
No, I
idea.
don't believe in that at all. I actually believe in the opposite.
One person at a time.
Yes.
Let me ask you about your teacher. Guru Ma, was that?
Guruma, yeah. So she was raised in Java. She was initiated from a family. She was from a royal family, and she had trained in the ancient Kajawan tradition, which is a form of Buddhist Hindu mysticism. But what happened to her was during the Japanese occupation, she fled for her life because the Japanese were came in and they destroyed parts of Indonesia, Java. So she fled. And while she fled, she sat in samadhi for 3.5 years. And during those 3.5 years, at the end, she was initiated in the Essenic tradition by an Egyptian teacher. And there her love for Christ began. So it's very strange. She died in 2012. It was very strange when I would bring people to her house and they would expect this Javanese Indonesian teacher, and then she'd have pictures of Jesus everywhere. So it's very strange for an Indonesian to love Christ like that, but she loved Christ through her expression. She was very, very close to him in prayer, in intercession. She believed the way to reach souls was through the intercession of souls. So that a lot of her time was spent in lamentation, in deep hours of intercession and stillness. And the way that she taught Christ was very, very different to the way I was taught Christ at school. I was also the senior mentor at the London Oratory, which is the main Catholic school in the UK. But it was a very, very different expression of Christianity. She used the text from different traditions. She taught that Christ was the express image of God, right? Whereas I've always believed that Jesus is the incarnation of God.
My friends in France, the Gottmans, say Jesus put a face on God.
It's
Beautiful.
beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's a nice word.
yeah. She taught that the closest thing to God was Jesus. If you wanted to see the Father, you would look at Jesus. That drawing close to Jesus was drawing close to God. That's how she taught it. If you read, yeah,
And the ancient Christianity, the famous line, truly human, truly divine.
mm,
That's how they got past the heresies of, well, is he human or divine? Or this one, God became man so that man might become God.
I see.
Wow.
It's beautiful.
So how does martial arts fit into all of this journey?
But yeah, so martial arts, because she ran a school, she ran an esoteric school called the Sphinx. She had a clinic there she was treating people with Ayurveda, and she taught martial arts. So I studied there full time. I learned all of the esoterics, all of the medicine, all of the therapy, and all of the martial arts. And I've continued since 1989. That's what I've done. She is, yeah.
Yeah, not as much as Stephen, but I focus predominantly more on the motion and the movement, the yoga aspect. I practice a lot more sitting now, more than teaching. Just really refining, working on myself mainly at the moment, but also teaching as well.
Okay, so let me say very briefly about the fourth way, right, which is Rogue Gurdjieff's attempt to bring to the West these deep mystical insights of ancient Eastern Orthodoxy, and perhaps Sufism as well. The whole idea is how to be in that meditative peace in the midst of the noise, in the midst of ordinary life, how to
I
have
see.
an inner mastery and use of attention and overcoming of mechanics of our reactivity to establish an inner sanctuary that is entirely independent of the external circumstances.
I see.
And it is extraordinarily potent. It is an esoteric knowledge that when I came upon it, you had to dig very deeply beyond society to find it. Now it's on the internet, right? Which means it's been diluted, lost,
Yes,
confused,
yes.
upside down. But it is fascinating that the intensity of your effort is meant to be accessed through the subtlety of attentiveness and application of knowledge. There's a simple formula: knowledge, this knowledge, plus being, that is your character, your behavior, equals understanding.
Mm.
And so that our evolution, our awakening, our expansion. So his idea is that it's totally against what modern psychology assumes, that we are in fact in a lower state of consciousness, asleep, hypnotized, completely victims of our own automatic behavior, and that this awakening is really a shock, an access shift of conscious awareness. Something akin, if I may, to the psychedelic journeys
I
that
see.
people take,
I
except
see.
it's natural and it's real. Dividing your attention, having an arrow of attention that way and that way, so that you are aware of yourself without being completely pulled out of yourself, yeah, as a first step to what he calls self-remembering, which is a new state of consciousness where a sense of self that is not the little self, that is not
Right.
ego and so
You
forth.
yourself.
Right? So he speaks of essence and personality, all of this artifice that we've created. Different language that you have, so what shall we say, leapt over, right? The issue of dissolving personality, false personality, is is no longer on your radar because you've shifted your attention straight to the light.
Mm.
And perhaps your own suffering has allowed you to access essence and bypass vanity, petty pride, need for power, requirements of others, all of those little things. But for most people, they have to walk through that jungle and get out of it.
But the I see the dissolving of the ego is a daily. Guru Ma would always say, she would always say, look, there's some of you here that will befriend the ego. There's some of you here will just get to the stage where you can become aware of the ego. And there's some of you that will take the ego off a cliff. You will dissolve it entirely. So for me, the ego self, the construct of the ego self starts from the moment you start protecting the sacred center. Because intellectually, you're awake one minute, fully you're aware, and then all of a sudden you become aware that maybe you're not good enough, maybe you're being told off, maybe you're being set apart in the wrong way, and so you defend, grip, hold on, build, construct these outer shells. Those have to come down, those have to dissolve. But what I was trying to articulate earlier was I was using the wrong mechanisms to dissolve them. That's what I realized.
So let me ask you this. I understand in the objective sense how everyone has a sacred center. Now,
Yes,
but the reality is most people have no awareness that they have a sacred center,
it's
right?
true. It's true. It's true.
They don't even understand what the word sacred means.
It's true.
That's very true.
What is unique about your thing here, I would say, is that in most cases, I think of people I know who have journeyed into other qualities of consciousness. They've had to completely reject and abandon Christianity to the point that they don't want to hear the name Jesus or Yeshua. They can't hear it.
Wow.
Too many
Wow.
associations. Whereas you,
I
having
see.
gone that same journey of the experiential awakening, completely claim Yeshua.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes, completely.
That to me is the hope, the tonality of this future thing, post Christian structures and power bases, to integrate the authenticity, the purity of Yeshua's unique teaching into all of the intuitions of humanity that lead us towards real awakening, real consciousness. To be able to embrace Yeshua fully without all of the wounds and hurts, bitterness about what Christianity has been
Yes.
and is.
Yes.
That's a tough one. That is a resolution of paradoxes.
It's true. It's true. It's true.
Absolutely true.
It's
Yeah.
true. You know, for many years, for many years, Laarni will tell you, I've prayed, Father, is there a place where I can grow as a disciple, student of Jesus Christ? Is there a place? And I have searched and I have looked humbly with no judgment. I've put myself in places where I've sat at the back and just waited to see and hear and feel, and I haven't discovered one yet. But I would, if you said to me today, Steve, there's a place here, you'd see me there tomorrow morning. I have
So
searched.
let me,
Go ahead.
well, okay. Does the name Callistos Ware mean anything to you? He was the Archbishop. He just died recently. This
The
good
name
old
rings a
Timothy
bell.
Ware, out of Oxford, became the great English Orthodox scholar who
Mm.
brought to the English-speaking world so many of the teachings of the Holy Fathers. Callistos Ware. Let me mention one other place you may not have searched. In Essex, I don't know if that's in your neck of the woods.
Oh,
Wow.
that's
No?
the other side.
Other side, Essex Monastery. The abbot was a man named Father Sophroni, who was the disciple of Saint Silouan of Mount Athos at the beginning of this century. He's holding a parchment in a vision of Christ saying, with Christ saying to him, hold your soul in hell and do not despair. And he became one of the great saints of the 20th century and is the teacher of Sophroni, who had been an artist, went to Mount Athos, ends up in England, became spiritual father to my friends Alphonse and Rachel Gottman,
Wow.
who is Orthodox priest. So right there in some little corner of England with all of its terrible issues, right, all of its brokenness, there was a little golden. However, clearly you weren't meant to find it in your sincere search, because apparently there was another purpose to be had. Yeah, another
Definitely.
path. And so with this connection with Yeshua, which comes from your teacher, I imagine. Yeah.
It's the foundation came, and then as I started to go deeper into the practice of surrendering, allowing, and reading the text, my heart surrendered. I saw, to the point. Look, Ted, when you ask me what am I going to do now, I'm going to go into different places, different regions, and share Christ with people. That's what I'm going to do. I don't have a covering. I don't have a covering. You know what I mean by that? A covering. I don't, I'm not accountable to any institutions or anything, but I've started. I'm in a cafe, I'm talking to someone. What are you reading? I'm reading the Gospel of John. Can I buy you a Bible? That simple. You know, I'm walking down the road, I do a sit in the park. Oh, I perceive you're a Buddhist. No, the conversation starts very, very simple. And my heart is richly blessed to do that.
So you are out there speaking of Yeshua
Yes.
while rejecting all religions. How interesting is that?
Yeah,
You're going to confuse a few people.
definitely. But wasn't Yeshua himself surrounded by the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees?
It is religion that crucified
Sadly.
Yes.
Mm,
him. He said, "You have heard it said, Old Testament,
Yes,
sacred laws, but I say to you."
yes,
mm,
yes, yes.
It is not what comes in, it is not the kosher laws, it is what comes out. He
What comes
was
out?
defying the very identity of the Hebrew people in the
Yeah.
kosher laws. So, yeah, absolutely radical 100%. And that's what we missed. That's what was domesticated. The fact that he had single women around him, like Mary Magdalene and others, in a day when women were not allowed to read the Torah,
That's
when the
mm,
rabbis would cross the street to not walk past a woman, he
that's
had
right.
them. So no rules from him. It was a new day for sure. And there's John the Baptist, first prophet after 400 years, saying, "Here he comes," right?
Yep, yep,
yeah.
yep, yep. Definitely.
So, absolutely. It's just interesting as to where will this lead? So, you
Mm,
speak a language that no longer belongs to the custodian of that language, right?
Mm.
And I will tell you this, as one who went through the Protestant form as a complete black sheep, seeking spiritual seekers who were willing to, at, against all odds, step into a church one more time after being Buddhist for 30 years. Those kinds of people came to me.
I see. I see.
The trouble is, the form ultimately could not support or sustain it because it was doomed. Okay, so
mm,
something new is necessary. But discovering that people will resonate to that, will respond to, yes, I knew there had to be something mystical, transformational about
mm,
this man, other than the pablum and culturally bound nonsense of the churches. And as I speak to seekers in your neck of the woods, in Wales and other places, there's one that's right near you I just talked to. These are UK people who were damaged by Pentecostalism or
Yeah.
Jehovah Witness stuff. How
Yes,
did
yes.
this American frontier ignorance end
Mm.
up in England,
It's
mm,
messing
massive.
with the psyche of the people there?
It's massive.
mm,
It's huge. I had a friend of mine who died, who suicided because he was so indoctrinated by this sense of I'm going to hell that he killed himself. This.
So there you go. That's what you're after, to bring some light in some way into
Yes,
space time so that people don't do that
yes, exactly.
out of wretched misunderstanding.
Yes, yeah. This kind of radical Pentecostalism, which is swayed with beautiful rock music, is has influenced so many people, and initially it starts off well. Initially, the first year it starts off as a good club, and then the years go by, and you see how damaged they are. You know?
Because beneath it all is a fundamentalist, literalistic theology
Yes,
worthy of hell and damnation, right?
yes,
But it's
exactly.
marketed so nicely to
Yes,
lure you in.
Yes.
complete loss of their sound mind, which is the saddest part. So,
We've had it in our own families. She's had it. I've had it in my own families, brothers, sisters, relatives. It's been snatched by these doctrines and never recovered, you know?
You had mentioned doctrines in the book, and I just want to say in passing, part of the tragedy of all this, Evelyn Underhill, who you really want to get to know, because she speaks of your language somehow despite the structures of the church. You might like to know Thomas Merton, New Seeds of Contemplation.
Thomas Merton, I've read, yeah.
What was I going to say about that? The so she says that doctrines, creeds, are just an effort to put into words a mystical experience, so that Gregory of Nazianzus, Cappadocian father, who's trying to talk about the Holy Trinity, is simply trying to do the impossible, to speak of what he feels in the cosmic fluidity of cosmic love, right? The community of love, the manifestation of the energies of God, all of that comes out awkward because it cannot be put into words. And then it solidifies into doctrine and ultimately becomes potentially ridiculous, incomprehensible, or
Over time.
over time, So you are on this frontier trying to bring something strangely a la early evangelist, talking about Christ to people, right? And yet Buddhist, Eastern, universal, you're just interested in helping whoever spirit puts in your path.
It's true. It's exactly that. You see, when I saw the living Christ, and I mean the living Christ inside, when he revealed himself to me, I saw it in all the text. I saw Jesus everywhere. I saw the living word everywhere. I saw it in creation. I saw it in the text. I saw it in the Upanishads. I saw it in the Vedas. I saw it everywhere. I saw it in the Buddhist teaching and saw the parallels everywhere. So knowing this, there's a beautiful sense of, if I sit with a Hindu or if I sit with a Buddhist, I can just see he's somehow pointing to Christ. It's not a difficult task to lead people there. The only struggle I have is, what happens when they come? How do they get discipled? Where do I then take them to? Who do I take them to? Who do I point them to? How can they grow as spiritual children into mature disciples? That is the issue I have, and that's where maybe you can help me.
Okay, that is the issue. I deal with individuals ready right now. Give me a community, give me something that I can build on in my love for God. And indeed, that is a tough one, because ultimately, the real lover of God is going to be in solitude, because most people will not be able to understand what he's talking about or she's talking about. Human community eventually, inevitably dissolves into cult-like hierarchies
Yes.
of behavior. And so the best you can do is have the creativity to think for yourself. Go into a place like an Orthodox church, sip what feeds the soul, breathe in that incense, see that devotional energy that is there, that is so not of this world, and then put aside the fact that women can't go behind the iconostasis and other superstitious elements brought
Okay.
down, and people can't seem to do that. Either they go in and accept it, and then they find they can't accept this. I have one fellow with strong Zen Buddhist background who goes to an Orthodox church and immediately understands that the priest and the people are not as awake as he is. What is he going to do? You know? So, forgive me, this is what comes to me. Maybe you just have to create your own thing. Maybe you have to have that space. This is what we do here, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, to create experience, to create common sharing of authentic things. Not because you want to, but because there's no place else. I could send you to Bethany, Eastern France. I'm not sure anybody speaks English there yet. Maybe that's going to change. I've been translating their books for years, but I'm the only connection. But here is a little Orthodox community, Western Orthodoxy, very different than East, much more open, flexible, warm. Yeah, not uptight like Russian Orthodox, right? Gravitas. Who still speak of Hindu gurus, as the Gotmans did, who see the connections and yet are authentically Orthodox and are people of light because they live it, they breathe it. It's, so at least you could confirm that, hey, there are a few communities, maybe.
Oh, that's nice.
That's
Nice
good
to
to
know.
know.
And those folks have connected to them some real heavyweights of spiritual knowledge. There's one fellow, Father Jean-Yves Leloup, a name you may have heard of.
Yes.
He wrote on the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of
Thomas.
Mary, and he's
Yeah.
an Orthodox priest, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah.
But he's a Bethany friend. So that group of people have a harmony and a beauty that you would enjoy discovering.
Wow.
But very small, very limited, and potentially unable to speak to the world, the language of the world. Just the fact that they're dressed in Orthodox clothes is going to be a problem, right? At least you can meet people where they are. Yeah.
True. It's true. But did you go from becoming a Protestant to joining the Eastern Church?
No, I went from leaving the church completely in search of meaning and truth to becoming a student of Gurdjieff and the Fourth Way and entering an esoteric underground school for 4 years, only to discover that behind all the sophistication there was no goodness.
Oh, I see.
So I left and eventually went into seminary under the pretense, shall we say, that this Protestant denomination was open to the entire legacy of the church. So I could be Protestant while teaching the Holy Fathers and their mysticism, which I don't necessarily recommend as something to do. And then at the conclusion of my ministry in the Protestant world, having spent 25, 30 years translating and reading the Holy Fathers, I decided to go all in. I actually lived in a church in the attic in a dormitory for a whole year, lighting the candles for the priests in the morning. So I completely immersed myself in Orthodoxy. And it was very special, very powerful, very important. But the important thing to say to you is that I came out the other side. Because ultimately, all of those limitations that one has to overlook in order to get to the meat of the matter, all those limitations separate people. It makes me think of Brother Lawrence and the practice of the presence of God.
Yes, I know it well.
Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful, isn't it? In the midst of the noise of the pots and pans.
Beautiful.
It's just as if I was in front of the altar on my knees. That is the inner work, and that is the inner transformation, the overcoming of negativity, things that for you might have happened perhaps more naturally through meditation. For the man in the street, so to speak, dealing with impatience and anger and such, thinking that's power, thinking it's normal, not realizing it's pure toxicity.
Yes.
Those discoveries, at that practical level are crucial to just get to base camp, to join
Yes.
you in a certain kind of meditative experience.
100%.
Because otherwise they leave it, go home and kick the dog, right? It doesn't integrate with every
Exactly.
moment of life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And one of your shortcuts, I would say, which is odd to say for someone who's made so many efforts, but the shortcut is love of Christ. It takes you straight there.
Amen.
Yes.
Well, despite what I opened up with about the paradox, right?
Yes, yes.
No question that your message is critical
Thank
because
you.
most people do not feel worthy,
Yes,
cannot find the door,
yes.
cannot imagine that it is that
Mm.
simple.
Yes.
And as you know, in the West, we do, right? Doing and being in the East. And the doing is still crushes us in our inability to find peace. I wanted to say, just to make another connection. So you mentioned your son found peace and then radiates it to others. Saint Seraphim of Sarov, somebody you would enjoy knowing. He's called the Saint Francis of the East. There he is.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Saint Seraphim, mid 1800s, so not so long ago. In fact, there's a document that is worthy of discovering, written by one of his disciples, an intelligent, well-educated man, who went to see him one winter, and they're outside in the snow, and they're talking about Holy Spirit. And at one point, he says the uncreated light just spilled out of Seraphim of Sarov and covered the snows all around them
Wow.
as he spoke of Holy Spirit.
Wow. Wow. Beautiful.
And what this wonderful man had to say, Christianity is the acquisition of the Holy Spirit.
Wow. Wow.
Mm.
Wow.
And he said, acquire peace. This is why I wanted to tell you this. Acquire peace, and 1,000 people will discover peace.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful.
A delight to meet you, and I know that this is blessed, and so more is to come, whatever
Thank
it
you.
might be.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you again, Ted.
Last question. I don't think I ever fully understood why you call it this.
Until the last breath is an expression that came to me when I surrendered fully. It was a prayer until the last breath. I will serve you until the very last breath.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Ted.
Thanks
Thank
again.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bless you.